So today I'm really excited to be joined by Daniel Ferguson from Columbus, Ohio. Welcome, Daniel.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure. And we are, so as polyglots together, we're going to be talking about AAVE, or African American Vernacular English. So let's start with the polyglot thing. So how did you get into languages?
Oh, man. As a kid, my god sister started taking German in high school. I was really young and super impressionable. And with her learning German, that made me want to learn as well. I had no idea about languages. My family didn't necessarily know how to engage this interest of mine.
Uh-huh.
I just knew that I wanted to learn. I was probably 7 or 8 that I remember. I used to think Espanol and Spanish were two completely different languages. When I found out that my cousin was taking German, I told my great aunt, who actually, excuse me, not my great aunt, my godmother. So we share the same godmother. And on Fridays, she used to always take us to bookstores. So I told her, hey, Tasha's learning German. I really want to learn German. And so she bought me my first Helga's Learn German for Kids through song and things. Yeah. And I played the heck out of those cassettes over and over again. Stupid little songs like Ich heiße Moritz. Hallo, wie heißt du? And that was my start, really with, how much, I guess I realized how much I really did love learning languages. And for me, it was this cool secret code that I wanted to crack and couldn't get enough of. So I started taking German formally. And I was actually born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. So Toledo's about 2.5 hours north of Columbus. And there, I grew up with a lot of Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. My high school was very diverse, but I pretty much clicked with Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. And so I got very interested in Spanish as well, informally. And I bought, again, lots of books, and started learning book Spanish and then trying to use it out with my friends. And they're like, no se dice así.
We don't say that. Yeah,
And that started my journey with Spanish. And from there, just kind of a snowball effect. So I continued to study German formally at university. Also, throughout high school, I had the opportunity to do some post-secondary options. So I got to dabble in Japanese at the University of Toledo. Got to the Ohio State University for undergrad, studied German, and then dipped my toes with Chinese. Did a year of intensive Mandarin listening for my tones and things like that. And once I graduated, I studied German linguistics and theater throughout undergrad. So when I graduated, I applied for Fulbright, and then that took me to Austria.
Wow. Where you were until quite recently, is that right?
Yeah. Exactly. Austria is my second home. I love my beautiful, sweet Austria so much.
Where were you based there?
Graz.
Never. I've only been to Vienna, really, and Innsbruck.
Graz is 2 hours south by train. It's a super student-friendly town. You say it's klein, aber fein.
Small cities are actually nicer, aren't they? In a way, especially as a foreign student, you don't want to be in some massive city where people don't really hang out with each other and it's hard to get to know people.
Exactly. It's super intimate. You had your group of people. And again, what I loved about Austria was its linguistic diversity. So there was obviously the expat community, which I tried really hard to stay away from at the beginning, but it's inevitable in a town the size of Graz. But yeah, a lot of my friends, they spoke many different languages, Serbian, Bosnian, Croatian being a huge majority of my friends out there.
Did you learn any of those?
Definitely.
Yeah?
Definitely.
Cool.
Oh, yeah. Srpski. I would say I speak more Serbian. My first interaction in the Balkans, though, was a trip to Bosnia. I was visiting a friend there. obviously learned a little bit of like Bosnian dialect to communicate, and everyone there was so amazingly wonderful and open and very encouraging. So when I came back to Graz, I started, learning more and trying to communicate with students that were teaching at the time.
Cool.
And then I met my husband. So, and my husband's Serbian. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. So did you learn any of those? Yeah. So you're invested in a bit of Serbian. How wonderful.
So, yeah, and then.
And you took him back to Ohio with you?
Yes. After we got married, we ended up getting married in Copenhagen.
Very cool.
We did the whole international marriage certificate thing in preparation for moving back to the States. And then, was it 2015? That was the year of legalized love. So everything kind of went smoothly, as smoothly as possible, and we moved.
How wonderful.
I'm African American. He's Serbian. He understands me. He doesn't necessarily speak AAVE, but he is picking up on some of the mannerisms with, or some of the ways we express ourselves when it's not so. I guess if I'm not being so formal or using international English, which, international English is the thing, and that's kind of the language we use when I couldn't really speak Serbian, and he couldn't really speak German at the time. So he learned Serbian, I learned Serbian, and then,
So you've got several languages in common. That's great. And an excellent segue into AAVE. So tell me about AAVE. How do we define it, firstly?
AAVE, the definition of AAVE. So when I use it, I don't think of AAVE being a separate language from English. And so AAVE specifically, if you refer to like the dual hypothesis, is that there's AAVE is made up of two components. So there's basic standard English, and then you have this sliver of components that make AAVE unique and special. Okay. And that is what I refer to when you say AAVE. So African American Vernacular English refers to those types of features. So it's a language variety. It's a language variety just like New Yorker English or Southern varieties of English that are spoken, or even Boston dialects. It's a language variety that people use that unfortunately doesn't have a whole lot of language prestige, but it's absolutely beautiful. And again, my mother tongue. So
it is. So it's your mother tongue. That was something I was going to ask you.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like when I recount, or even like look back on how I realized that what I spoke was not quote unquote standard, and the attitudes of using AAVE in school. I struggled in the beginning like, tremendously in school because I just didn't quite get it. I didn't quite understand test questions. I didn't quite understand the genres in which I was just expected to just know how to write in and use, right? And actually within our community, it was a lot of like AAVE speakers looked down on the dialects. So there was a huge push in order to learn standard and to not express or show that side of you, so that you can get ahead, right? So that you can be successful, so that you can get a job. And so like I went through a lot of eradicationalist pedagogies. And ultimately I would say that was my entire like K through 12 education, trying to get rid of my dialect.
What's your earliest memory of that in school?
My earliest memory would probably be when I want to say third grade, third grade, right when we're starting to learn paragraph structures and how to formulate thoughts. my thoughts and ideas. I remember being corrected. I don't exactly remember what I was saying, but I remember being corrected and told, that's wrong. This is what you write, from my third grade teacher. And then I became hyper aware because I love school and I wanted to do well. So I made it my job to learn standard English as best as possible.
So that kind of idea that your language is wrong, because there's that whole thing that you go to school and one of the things that you do in many, many countries is to learn like the standard, the prestige variety, which is what you're expected to write in and what you're expected to have formal conversations in. But with some people, there's that kind of added thing of being told that your variety isn't just not the one that you're learning, but is wrong and is inferior and is bad. So you internalize that in one way, which was, okay, if you're telling me this is the prestige variety, I'm going to learn it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was also preached as the language of survival, right? So you learn standard English or what have you. Standard English, meaning white mainstream English. You learn it, and this is what's going to save you. And unfortunately, as we've seen with recent events and, reoccurring events throughout American history, doesn't matter if I speak dialect. It doesn't matter if I speak white mainstream English or standard English. Standard English doesn't actually save you. And that begs the question of, I guess, revisiting AAVE and talking about what it is and understanding its social and historical value that it has and represents, and understanding that every time I speak it or use it, that I am carrying a part of my history.
Absolutely.
Part of my African American history. Yeah. With my last name being Ferguson, mind you.
So, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to, that first got me interested in AAVE, or one of the things was actually the talk that you did was it in New York for the Polyglot Conference?
Yeah, we had just moved to the States, and Ellen and Richard contacted me, and I decided, oh, why not? Let's do it. So, yeah, it was the Polyglot Conference in New York City.
Because there are some fantastic and really fascinating features of AAVE that you don't really get in most varieties of English. Yeah, so you kind of expect lots of varieties of English are going to have different pronunciation. They're going to have some words, some kind of varieties in their vocabulary that will be specific to them. And there may be some grammar differences, but they're going to be about conjugations. So, a lot of linguistic diversity in the UK where and there's a north-south divide where we swap the past tense of be. So in my original dialect, it's I was, you was, he was, we was, they was. And my wife is from the north of England, and in her original dialect, it's I were, you were, he were, she were, they were. Right? But AAVE does whole different ballpark of stuff of having, like the aspect system is just totally different from many of those kind of, especially the European varieties of English. So tell me a bit about that.
So tense and aspect in the AAVE system is fascinating. So, I mean, first, when we start looking at it, the first feature that kind of really pops out is that you mentioned conjugation, right? Now, in AAVE, conjugation of the copula exists. Meaning I can say I am, you are, he, she, it is, we are, you are, they are, etc. However, when the copula is not conjugated, when it's just used as its base form, be, that expresses habituality. So, for example, if I was talking about a famous example would be school buses. What color are school buses? School buses are yellow, right? And AAVE, that would be expressed, school buses be yellow.
Because they're always
something
yellow.
they're always yellow. They're usually, one of my pastimes is learning languages. So, Daniel be learning languages is a very common way to express something that Daniel typically, usually, normally does, which is learning language. B
as opposed to he's learning languages right now. Don't disturb him because...
Exactly, right
what would
now.
That be?
And that's, well, it's simply the conjugation of the verb.
So he is learning languages.
He is learning languages now.
You don't want to disturb him at the moment because he's learning languages.
There's a really great experiment that Lisa Green does.
He be learning languages.
Exactly. And so, there's a really great experiment that Lisa Green does with her work. She does a lot of work with language in the African American child. And I believe she went, if I recall correctly, she goes to a little boy's house. And this little boy is obsessed and fascinated with trains, right? He loves his train sets. He loves to build trains and all that jazz. She goes and he's like, okay, where does your train set be? She asks him. And even though the train set is right in front of her, she's looking at the train set. The boy says, oh, it'd be in my room. It's like, but where is your train set? Oh, it's right here.
It's right here, but that's not where it'd be because... Wow. And that's one of those examples where it's richer than many varieties of English, including general American, general British English, international English, where you can't make that distinction very easily. There isn't a verb form for it.
Exact. Present tense is always one of those tricky things to teach in an authentic scenario, right? Yeah. It's the first thing, one of the first things that traditional language courses will go through. But I mean, that notion of habituality is just, again, we need some form of a time denoting adverbial in order to indicate that this is always going on. But
it's usually in my room, but it happens to be here at the moment.
Exactly.
That doesn't have the same richness. And I'm reminded, I did an Irish language course, a weekend intensive last year. And there are two verb forms in Irish for that copula.
Tá ceol sa teach tower na nocht. There's music in the pub tonight. Bín ceol sa teach tower na gach cédin. There's music in the pub every Wednesday.
And because native Irish speakers kind of miss that in English, in Hibernian English, spoken by native Irish speakers, they make the difference. So they will say, there's music tonight in the pub. There bees music every Wednesday.
Ah, there are bees. I like it.
Yeah. What other features are there in terms of the aspect system and those features of grammar that are fascinating?
Would say completive done. Slavic languages are notorious for their aspectual system, right?
Yeah.
So you have differing verbs. Two verbs. For every verb in English, you have two verbs in a Slavic language denoting imperfective or perfective aspects. And so done is a completive form, right? The equivalent of done in in standard English would be present perfect tense. That's the best translation. Yeah. So if I asked you, have you eaten? And then your response would be, I done ate. So done requires, you always find an environment where it's verb ed afterwards. So it's always looking for verb ed.
So it takes the past form of the verb.
Yeah, did you eat? Yeah, I done ate. Yes, I've eaten in that case.
Yeah.
Did you study? Did you do your homework? Yeah, I done did it. Mom, I done did it. Okay?
I can go out because I've done my homework. Yeah,
exactly. So completive done's a fun one. There's also remote to talk about the remote past. We use two versions of been, one stressed and one unstressed. For example, if I been had something, been had remotes. I've had it for a really long time.
And also the past with the past verb.
Exactly. So a lot of these features, they work in conjunction with a past tense, but it's the aspect of been or done, or some of what I used to work on a little bit more was done gun. It's still an ongoing project, still like trying to research its usage. It's becoming more and more difficult because of the diaspora, and not all AAVE speakers will have all of these different features in their language, right?
Yeah.
So with done gun, that's another aspectual attitudinal particle now that you get in AAVE. That can express positive or negative attitudes, as in, oh, look what you done gun did. Context being, I'm sitting on a white carpet. I spill, some juice on the carpet. My grandfather comes in. It's like, oh, look what you done gun did. Right. That's a negative, obvious situation. But if I ran a mile in, let's just say, 4.5 minutes or something incredulous, right? Then it's like, oh man, that boy done gonna run a mile. He done gonna run a mile and whatever. So what I love about AAVE is, again, there's like these little teeny tiny words that carry so much meaning and expressivity that, because they differ so much from the standard, people just look at it and they're like, oh man, like that's so ignorant. Why are they saying it? But it's actually quite specific and meaning. Yeah, so you have, I would say, so be habituality, done, completive done. You have remote past, been. So I've been, did something. And then you have done gun, which is this attitudinal property. And
you mentioned stressed and unstressed been. What do they do?
So been, for example, he been running. If I say he been running, that means he's been running for a really long time. Right? But if I say he been finished and stress the been, that means he's been finished for a while now. He had finished a while ago and now he's totally...
But not like ages and ages ago. So more
exactly.
Recent. So, and neither of those mean he's been running, so he's all sweaty.
Correct. It's he's been running, meaning that's literally the aspect of the activity and imperfectivity. It's not completed.
It's not that resultative thing that you get in international and general English.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Where does AAVE come from? And I know that's a loaded question because there are lots of theories, aren't there?
There are so many theories, right? There's the Creole hypothesis theory. There's the English dialects hypothesis. So Creole hypothesis is basically that there was a common plantation Creole that was spoken among slaves in the antebellum period. And the English dialect hypothesis is basically saying that the speech of slaves and plantations in the South is basically rooted in English spoken in the British Isles and then brought over by white immigrants to America. So that would be your poor whites with whom slaves would have interacted.
So they're not necessarily university professors, those people. So
exactly.
The language they spoke wasn't necessarily the prestigious standard.
And so you would have slaves that were divided kind of in two camps, right? You would have slaves that worked on the larger cotton plantation fields in the South, and then you would have slaves that worked on the smaller tobacco plantations up north, right? So the slaves that worked on the smaller plantations had more access to the standard variety spoken at that time, as opposed to the ones that worked on the larger fields who would have interacted more with the poorer immigrants and that nature. So I guess I believe in the settler principle of AAVE being a combination of both. We obviously learn how to speak from those who are around us in our environment. And being that a lot of these slaves, their situations were so different, and whoever they were around, they had to learn language as a means to survive. I would say that it's a combination of both this creolist and the dialectal, the English dialects hypothesis that makes
that seems logical, doesn't it? Because those people definitely were in a contact language situation. Because they came from different parts of Western Central Africa. They didn't necessarily, therefore, have language in common. So there was contact between people from different language groups. And then they're coming into contact with people from different parts of the English-speaking world. And some pidginization and creolization must have taken place.
Exactly. So that first bit of language, that first, pidgin that developed between them and slave owners or other immigrants, right? That pidgin was taught to their children and each other. Exactly. And each other. That pidgin was taught. And then, as they had children, that pidgin started to creolize, and then it became, it took on its own distinctive qualities, for sure.
With the children's brains saying, hang on, this isn't a fully fledged language. I'm going to have to develop stuff around this.
Exactly.
And there are things in common, aren't there, between... So, I mean, that kind of innovation of how to express aspect is also found in other Creole languages of that meeting of West African languages and English. That you find in the Caribbean, for example, and in West Africa today. Yes,
it is. And that I can't really speak to all of the features and the different languages that contain the same aspectual systems that AAVE does. My work is only really pertained to AAVE. But I will say that, yes, from the little bit that I've understood about West African languages, you are completely correct. And it makes total sense that, most of the West African slaves that come over would bring that, and then language transference would obviously occur.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems logical that because, I mean, I know a little bit about Jamaican patois, and there are definitely kind of aspect particles for things like completion and continuation.
I believe it.
And so, if and standard English or the kind of the dialects of English that are indigenous to the British Isles don't mark that. So it must have come from somewhere. People must have been saying, well, hang on, how do these people mark aspect? They don't seem to. The future. So where do you see AAVE going?
Oh, man. I mean, for the times, they are a-changin'.
They most certainly are. Hopefully for the best.
I hope so. Again, I was talking a little bit about my background growing up as an AAVE speaker.
Yeah.
And so all throughout my education, I would say I was confronted with a lot of, again, with April Baker Bell. She's a phenomenal person. She just recently wrote a book, Black Linguistic Justice. Highly recommend it.
Okay.
Yeah, Black language literacies and pedagogies. It's brilliant. So she talks a lot and uses the term eradicationalist pedagogy. And that is basically saying your language is wrong, our language is right.
Right.
So that was my K through 12 kind of experience. And then when I got to uni, right, I went to undergrad and I took my first African history course. Yeah, right. Super excited because, prior to that point, I knew nothing about Africa, right? Just curriculum wise, this wasn't in there, and you only learn very basic things about. So that
and Black
being
History
said,
Month's about the Civil Rights period.
Exactly. So my first introduction to African history was absolutely amazing, and that is what sparked my interest in, Black languages, as well as like how Black people speak or learn how to speak. Mm-hmm. So I took a couple courses with Don Winford, who is also an expert in the field. Uh-huh. And in those first classes, that's when I started to kind of shift my understanding to more of a respectability pedagogy, if you will, mm-hmm. of what Black language is, where it's, okay, I see you speak this dialect, and that's great. We value it. It's wonderful. But we still need to be able to code switch and code mix in order to be successful. Mm-hmm. And so that is kind of the mentality I took on for a while with AAVE. And once I got into public education and I continued working, and again, I gave presentations on AAVE and things, I realized a lot of anti-Black linguistic racism that I had internalized about my language variety and my culture and things. And so another shift happened, and that's more or less towards Black pedagogies. And Black pedagogies it really focuses and places Black language at the center, not negating, white mainstream English or what have you, but the goal of it is to teach more Black language speakers about the social, the political, and the historical importance of the language, how it works, showing them genres in which, mm-hmm. they use their language. And for me as an educator, that is definitely the direction that I am heading, at least. Providing genre-based pedagogy for Black language, and not just for Black language or for Black language speakers, mm-hmm. right? It's important for white people as well to have an understanding and to be able to interact in genres. It's really an education that's for everyone.
Indeed.
And in doing more research and figuring out what that looks like, April Baker Bell does a fantastic job laying out an entire plan for educators to use. I have recently become more interested in a language of solidarity, or the language of solidarity framework for Black Latinx students as well, because AAVE, just like Chicano English or Vietnamese English, mm-hmm. We all have our own stigmatized variety. So for me in the language classroom, to provide more equity, let's rethink the curriculum in terms of the genres and the books and the literacies that we expose kids to, and teach them, again, how to critically look at language and understand the intersectionalities of language, race, and power. And again, that's not to say that we don't need a standard or that standard languages don't serve some sort of purpose. But I guess what I am saying is that genre as a whole, so the genre of standard language, changes and fluctuates mm-hmm. based off of who's in power. Yeah. And when you when you separate that power and you distribute it accordingly, it's going to be interesting to see how that changes. If genre are social practices that we use in order, or ways in which we use language to get things done, it's going to be interesting to see with the development of these pedagogical frameworks, what happens when the standard isn't necessarily the genre that we use to communicate.
Indeed. And it's about a different understanding of what language is and what the relationship between a standard dialect and other varieties is. Because I think there's often been a way of teaching that's about, this is correct because it's inherently right. Mm-hmm. Other than, this is the dialect that happened through a mad series of historical accidents to be the one that we all have to learn because that's the one that gives us access to various things that we want.
Yep.
But it's not inherently better than any other. And it's definitely not better than what you speak, oh little 5-year-old who just come into my class and who's going to be scarred for life unless he's really, he or she or they is really, really resilient and can take that feeling of, the first day being told that the way they've spoken their entire lives is wrong and lazy and illogical and
and that's it. That's just it, in the classroom in particular. Like, we are learning English. You are teaching English language arts. However, there's so many different texts, right, and literacies out there to explore that highlight, the beautiful facets of each one of our cultures. Yeah, and I just think in this day and age, especially given the climate, the current political climate and where we're heading, this type of pedagogy is not just one that's lofty in the clouds. It is absolutely necessary and imperative that our kids understand how language, race, culture, identity, and power intersect, right? Mm-hmm. And how to dismantle a lot of the linguistic supremacy or systemic racism that exists out there. And I think we all can do it by adopting such curriculum or such programs in an effort to become anti-racist as a human race. Mm-hmm. We all have our own lanes. We all have our own lanes and ways that we want to help and fight for social justice. But for me personally, anti-racism and anti-racist curriculum, the development thereof, that's my future. That's where I'm heading. And thinking really critically about how I can implement a lot of those things. One way that I've started is via, it's kind of a teacher scholar activist project of mine, but this project, with the pandemic going on, it offers kids tutors just to stay home and be safe and to be able to help with a lot of the remote curriculum. The tutors as well will be offering this genre-based anti-racist curriculum for guided reading and things like that, right? So that's one teeny tiny sliver. Remote tutoring services is what we're called. So that's just, again, I'm sorry, that was a very long, drawn out explanation, but
that's fine. I mean, I asked you to talk about the future, and the future is by definition long.
No, I'm super excited about the program. I really am. Right now, it's very much focused on getting kids the help they need to do the remote work. As it develops, we'll be offering a lot of this genre-based pedagogy for critical language awareness. So not just teaching them, this is a paragraph, this is, has a topic sentence and supporting details and stuff, but actually analyzing authentic text in terms of what language is actually doing and genre. So how it changes. So I'm super duper excited about that.
Yeah, I bet.
One of the things, when you said, like, as a white person who would be like interested in learning AAVE or like didn't grow up in an AAVE speaking environment, but says the wrong things and cringes. Me as an African American, when I learn languages, like I speak German, speak French, Spanish, right? Like there are lots of like Afrodeutsche, that's clear. But like you almost fight this imposter kind of like syndrome when I, as an African American, am speaking these languages. And I felt like the biggest imposter when I tried Chinese and, Japanese for the first time, because the sounds were just so different. But like, again, I appreciate Japanese and Chinese culture, right? Like I appreciate the sounds of the language. And I, in some way, still felt like I was appropriating just by saying hello or, how are you, whatever. And that actually stopped my language studies for a while. I couldn't get over this imposter syndrome. But then, I thought, you know what? Like, no, like I am learning the language. I am like, this is a part of it. I appreciate this language. And so then it became part of my identity. Right. And I feel like the difference between a person who grows up speaking a language and then who comes in and is kind of making fun and doesn't understand is the identity part. We all say as polyglots and, as many languages you speak, that many personalities you have or something like that, or you see the world in so many different ways. But in order to speak a language well, or even to really begin to understand, I feel like it starts with the identification of yourself. You have to see yourself in that language, in that role. And I feel if people cannot see themselves in the role of an African American, if they cannot see themselves in the position or the life of Blacks or Black language speakers here in the U.S., then there's never going to be a right time to learn it or have you. Just like if you can't see yourself in the position of some Papua New Guinea, I don't know, tribe, you know what I'm saying? If you can't honestly identify and see yourself, you'll never make that connection. So I just wanted to echo back, as we're discussing, I wanted to echo back to that point that you made.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I lived for a long time in China. And I can definitely identify with that thing of the difference between speaking a language that you definitely don't look like a native speaker of.
It is that identification or acceptance that you get from the community, right? And I think if your approach to learning AAVE or to becoming a part of the community, becoming more forming some solidarity with the community, that you will be received, because again, you are seeing yourself in the beauty of African American culture and its development and its ups and downs. So yeah, that's it. So
yeah, you are a great evangelist for that. And I think it's got to come first from those 5-year-olds being proud of who they are and what they speak. And it's wonderful to hear what you're doing in order to bring that about.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, for wanting to even do this interview.
Pleasure. Yeah. I've learned so much. Thank you so much. What can people do to support you in the work that you're doing in schools?
There are a lot of ways to support, actually. And more importantly, I think that people they can start critically looking at language and how they use language and those around them. It's that, for educators in particular, right? Understanding what it is that you're requiring out of these kids, understanding, that your language is power, understanding that you cannot extract language and race and politics from one another. It's that research component, for the everyday average person, understanding that just your language variety is no better than my language variety. And we all use language to do things, and how we do them is just different. So, in the short term, with supporting kids in classrooms, exposing kids to a lot of beautiful literature. I mean, there's lots of great literature in white America, but there's also beautiful literature in Arab cultures and Hispanic cultures, right? Broaden your horizons, not in any negative way of you should broaden your horizons, but, find moments of actively search for, ways that you can enrich and enhance your life. Multiculturalism Day doesn't have to be one day in the school calendar, right? Multiculturalism Day can be built in every day throughout our curriculum. So
yeah, learn to delight in the diversity of the world we live in.
For sure. And we'll see, with this project that I'm currently engaged in with remote tutoring services, I really hope that people will be interested in getting these tools in the hands of their kids, right? Again, initially it's more or less tutoring for more or less tutoring for kids while they're doing remote learning and things. But as courses develop, critical language analysis sounds like it's complicated, but it's really not. And I think that if we can teach our kids how to be more critical, especially of the world around us, that's a great way to make change. And learn languages.
There we go. Learn languages. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you so much,
getting
Dave.
to know you, and I will definitely tell you how my experience with Scots goes.
I can't wait.
And hopefully I will meet you one day at a Polyglot Conference somewhere.
Yes, I'm hoping to go. I'm hoping to go to Cholula.
I was very much looking forward to going to Cholula.
If that will happen, I don't know. We'll see what the state of the world is in. Exactly.
They should have created a vaccine by then.
Exactly. Hopefully.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.